and welcome to the CapLander podcast, where we dive into the dynamic world of private capital markets. Whether you're new to private market investing or a seasoned professional, this podcast unpacks the latest trends, insights, and opportunities shaping the industry. Featuring expert guests and deep discussions, CapLander is your go-to resource for staying informed and inspired.
And today we are welcoming Christos Richards, who is a longtime friend and colleague. Hi, Christos. And you are our retained search guy. And since I've known you, you've had a couple iterations across a few different, very high level firms. So fill us in a little bit where you came from, how you got here today.
Hard to believe that this next month will mark 43 years in the business. But I've been lucky enough.
You don't look old enough, Christos. You don't look a day over 33. I do remember buying you a pair of Gucci loafers for some birthday in there. And I think those probably already wore out their welcome mat, right? They were resold a few times.
I resold them about 7 times. They were one of my favorite pairs of shoes, without a doubt. Well, thank you. I've been blessed to be doing this for 4 decades, biotech since 1991. Probably the most meaningful 3 parts of that journey since I got into biotech was 15 years working with Becky Levin. Becky is Mark Levin's wife. Mark, who founded Third Rock Ventures. And I think that that's important because that's where we came into contact, Jody. Working primarily with venture-backed early-stage companies that were anywhere from 2 to 20 or 20 to 200 people versus
Christos, let's be clear. Let's set the record straight. We met in the elevator at the St. Francis Hotel during the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. And how many years ago do you think that was?
Over 20.
Yeah, over 20. Morgan, you were just a little kid. You weren't even close to coming to JP Morgan. Actually, that's when the cocktail party, the first night the conference was not so big that the cocktail party was upstairs at the rooftop at the St. Francis versus what is now 15 cocktail parties every night where you can't even figure out where to start.
Yeah,
it was in the top floor ballroom, and I think you were engaged to be married, so you would know the date better than me. But it was
number 2 was no longer husband number anything. Morgan, your stepdad. He's a good guy though. Just a segue in there, but yes, I can't remember when that was. Maybe Morgan, you remember?
Nope, I plead the fifth on this one. I'm not getting into that one.
Okay, Chris, back to business.
So I guess for people who are not familiar with you or who do not have a long-standing relationship with you in the way that Jody does, and somebody's meeting you for the first time and you go, okay, well, how did you get into search? Obviously, you mentioned Third Rock Ventures, but tell us a little bit about your journey. And I mean, you've been doing this for 40 years, but how you got into it and why recruiting in the first place.
Actually, believe it or not, I'm a second-generation recruiter. So I was living in Switzerland. I decided to come back to the U.S. to go to business school. And I was married to my first wife at the time. I needed to pay the bills. So my stepfather said, you need a job. You need to pay the bills. Come to work with me. And I did. Picked up the phone in March of 1982 and never looked back. I mean, I'd been exposed to it because I'd been a part of his life for more than a decade. And, back in those days, a lot of the executives that he was recruiting, he couldn't speak to during the workday. So,
right.
He would invariably speak to them at night or on the weekend. Or
yes, you got to hear it all.
I heard it and I learned it. And from the first moment, my first call was kind of a train wreck, but I bounced back from that. The executive called me out on it. He said, this is, you haven't been doing this long, have you? I said, no, sir, I haven't. He goes, in fact, I bet you this is your first day on the job. Now, it's a Monday morning at 8 a.m. I wasn't just really thinking about it. But I said, I'm 26 years old. I said, well, yeah, 25 years old. I said, yes, sir, this is my first day. He goes, in fact, I bet this is the first call you've ever made.
Oh, my God.
I said, you're right. He goes, good luck. You're going to need it. Click. Hangs up on.
Oh, my God.
But, I just crossed his name off the list, picked up the phone and made the next call.
Keep dialing for dollars. We've all done that, right, Morgan?
Jody used to have me call people who were survey participants who had outdated responses and who needed to go in and update their data. And I can't tell you how many people I would talk to where they go, I don't have time for this right now. Boop, hung up the phone. That was it. I was like, okay, I'm moving on down that list now.
But you persevered, Christos. You stayed at it. And now it's changed many times over from when you first started.
It has. And I started in IT software and telecom. I then got into environmental and energy. There wasn't, most of my work was regional, Los Angeles at the time. There wasn't really any biotech in Los Angeles. Amgen was just a concept. But there was some healthcare services and Al Mann had started a series of med tech companies, so I did some work in the medical device sector. But it wasn't until 91 that Amgen really began to grow biotech in the Southern California basin. And my first search in biotech was for Amgen. And just, again, I've been doing it ever since then. 15 years with Becky, and then time at Spencer Stewart before my current firm recruited me. There's actually an entire industry of recruiters for recruiters, which is kind of funny. But I got recruited out of Spencer for this firm.
And because now you're leading the practice at Caliber One. So you have a whole team behind you who's doing all healthcare recruiting. What has changed the most? I mean, even from going from Spencer Stewart to Caliber One, how has the industry changed in your perspective over the last couple of years?
Well, over the last couple of years versus over the last 30 years, I mean, the reason Spencer Stewart is a fantastic global brand, and if you want a global firm, I think they're the best in the business. You know, there is a difference between being with a global firm and being with a boutique firm. I think boutique firm allows you to be, and actually insists that you're more high touch. I think my clients over the last 30 years have expected that if I sell the search, I'm going to be there for the search and do the work, you know, versus just selling it and passing it down.
It's like us. People always say when I'm on a call to talk about consulting, they always say, well, how does a project go? And I say, you're looking at it and talking to it, because if I am engaged in a project and we try and talk about your consulting, send you a proposal, you say yes, I'm part of the team that participates the whole way through. There's no bait and switch, which I think is probably why you're so well regarded and liked in the industry, because it's holistic. And we have said this on literally every podcast we've done with all of us, because you're an integral part of the ecosystem in the life science world, and people know you personally. And now I know you're actually even on a board of a private company because you've been so successful. People want you involved in more levels than just one area.
They do, and I'm fortunate in that respect. No, they actually want the partner that they sell the search to be leading in the search. I did actually just join the Codexis board. That's a public company. I've been public for not at all for a couple of decades now, and I was privileged to serve on the board of Coherus Biosciences as we went from 5 to 350 people and from private to public.
I worked on that project too. I did their comp work. We all had fun with that. We did all have fun with it. Morgan knows because you're having fun with it.
I'm on my first private company consulting project right now, where I'm more the lead of it, and Jody's graciously has let me lead this project. So I'm learning, and I've learned from the best in this part, but I do understand that having the boutique aspect is actually such an advantage in so many ways, because it is personal, and it is a personal relationship where somebody, where when they call or they have a question, they don't want to talk to an associate level. They don't want to talk to a stranger. They want to talk to who's on the project. And they want that consistency from the starting point really to the when you cross the finish line.
And they want access. Like, we're always accessible, but I know this about you, Christos. You're always accessible. I actually still remember your phone number by heart, because I used to text you and call you on things for work that I barely even remember my own phone number. I certainly don't know my Miami phone number. I still have my San Francisco number. But, you know, I even at the healthcare conference just now at JP Morgan, we couldn't sit without 10 people coming up to say hello to you. So I know you've talked about sort of what's your passion, what's driven you, and Morgan and I were discussing this ahead of time. I mean, there must be some part of it that really sings to you about this industry and how you find the perfect candidates and find not only the right candidate for the right job, right? Isn't that the key to it?
It is. There's a lot of potential questions wrapped up in that. This is very rewarding. I mean, look, in the 1980s, my clients were defense contractors in aerospace. And so I'm an advocate for a strong defense posture in the country. But there's no way of avoiding the fact that the products that my clients made killed people. That's the business of defense. The products that we are working on now in the field of healthcare are saving people's lives. And so that's an entirely different rewarding process. You know, my wife's a breast cancer survivor. I'm working with clients that are working in that field. We're all touched in our lives, especially as we get older, with cognitive dysfunction, viral diseases. We all had the COVID pandemic to contend with, and the fact that we're working with clients that are actually doing things to improve the lives of patients. I think that's someplace that I think that's an area that the pharma sector is really underappreciated. You know, they're viewed as the bad guys, but really nobody gets into the pharmaceutical industry to make money. They get into this industry because they want to help people.
We hear this all the time.
Patient health, and really the genuine nature, which is really even more so where I can understand why we've collaborated for so many years, decades actually, is because there's a true passion about a life science executive. but it's very easy for them to make a pitfall and avoid the business side of it. But you have to have trusted resources who have a shared vision. And that's obviously something that you're very passionate about as well. So I can see why the collaboration and your expertise has really been valued, because you understand their perspective and also how to help the companies be successful.
That's correct. And I think where I've seen it the most acutely, I mean, you didn't ask about this. When I would recruit a aerospace or a defense contractor or even a high-tech executive in the 80s, and you'd ask them, a natural part of what we do is tell us about your family, because we want to understand, can somebody relocate? They've got children in college. What are they studying? And invariably, executives in other sectors, their children would go in a vastly different direction. If they were electrical engineers or mechanical engineers or aeronautical engineers, their children were doing something entirely different. But it wouldn't surprise me if 90% of the biotech CEOs out there, that at least one of their children isn't pursuing either life science or public health or medicine. So it passes on in the family, and just in terms of that care.
You're the perfect example of it, because you're coming from a second generation. I mean, you just said that you got into recruiting because of your stepfather. So you're the perfect example of how when you have family involved, or you have family who's directly impacted or touched by the industry as a whole, it motivates you to want to be involved with it too.
Morgan, you're the perfect example as well, right? I'm the perfect example because my father is a PharmD and my brother has juvenile diabetes, and my grandfather was a doctor, and now my nephew is a doctor. Like, we all got here from a similar footprint where there was influence. And funny with you, Morgan.
My gosh, seriously. Well, okay. One of the things, so I'm going to pivot a little bit, because you mentioned that you went from Spencer Stuart to Caliber One, and Caliber One is, I want to correct me if I'm wrong, but from my homework ahead of time, is that they're based in London or headquartered in London. So it is a global practice, and you're in Los Angeles. We see a lot of talent moving from the US to the UK in particular, especially in life sciences, from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Cambridge in the United Kingdom. Are you seeing the talent market opening up more globally, or what are you seeing in your practice?
I mean, I think we're seeing a number of dynamics. So it's interesting, right? We have ecosystems and pockets of talent that develop here in the U.S., and they're primarily around three geographies. The primary footprint in the U.S. is Boston now for biotech. Number two is San Francisco. Number three is San Diego. That's not to take anything away from Seattle or Chicago or Texas or North Carolina or D.C.
Just different locations.
But they're different locations. But try to get somebody to move from Boston to Los Angeles, and you're going to get a flat out no. Try to get somebody to move from San Francisco to Chicago or Princeton, and 19 times out of 20, they're going to say no. Executives are comfortable. They've made enough money. They have a social circle. They have children in school. They have a spouse that's working. There's a lot of reasons that somebody won't move, but it's really quite astounding, the number of senior executives that sort of have Europe as part of a bucket list. And so if I say to a CEO, hey, I'm doing a CEO search for a company that's out in Boston and they're in San Francisco or San Diego, they say, yeah, I'm not really sure. My family's not really up for that. But if I call up somebody in San Francisco or San Diego or even Boston and say, hey, I've got a CEO search in London or in Basel or in Zug or up in Copenhagen, and it's surprising the number of executives say, you know what, that'd be really pretty interesting. I'd love to give my children an opportunity to learn a second language, be exposed to a new culture. So it's actually a lot easier to move executives domestically to international than to move them within the United States. I would also add that, though you didn't ask, Canada and the Pacific Rim. I mean, if you think about China and, in spite of the political dynamic, but, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, and certainly Singapore have all learned that you have to pay U.S. wages, Western wages, to capture Western talent. And 10 years ago, they didn't. 10 years ago, there was really a significant disparity in how much you would earn working abroad. But
especially for executives, because Morgan and I just got off a call this morning with London because and I met, your founding partner at your London office is actually, so I really do have a perspective on that for the success of your firm and how integrated you are in the UK and Europe. But the UK, and Morgan and I have been doing a lot of work with this BIA organization because they want comp data they can compare and contrast between the UK, the rest of Europe, and globally and in the United States. And we see that for the top people, there is a lot of consistency. It doesn't really matter where they're located. So we couldn't agree with you more.
And the work that we do is able to cross borders. I've just done two CEO searches for investors, one in Hong Kong and one in Singapore. Just placed the chief financial officer for a company called Hyperregenics, which is in Tübingen, Germany. That was actually just came out on, with an announcement yesterday. Just placed a very senior executive for Sendus Pharma, which is up in Copenhagen. So, we're able to work with clients internationally. And but our founding office was in London. We've now got offices across the U.S. and still the London office, but we're quite international now.
We've seen that the biggest differences in the compensation are for the more junior positions, like the entry-level scientists, the R&D scientists, the people who are in the labs is where there's more of a disparity in the pay internationally, which I think they've been able to get away with more because there's just been a lack of private company specific data in the UK and Europe, which is partly of why we're
not, if we can help it, right? We're on that.
Yes, we are very much on that. But I think that's been the biggest part of the United States, especially with having pay transparency laws coming, that there's more data out there now than ever before to see what people are making. And especially the markets that you mentioned, like Boston, San Diego, San Francisco, there's so much talent in those cities that they all kind of know what each other's making. But in our conversations, and we've talked about this before, is really how the equity component is so important for the private companies, which I'm sure you see in the offers, because the people will move jobs to get that equity.
Well, there's two things to touch on with what you just said, Morgan, that I think are important. So it is important to have that transparency. It's a huge positive, but there is a negative associated with that. And the negative is that the employment market will become much more sophisticated. I mean, it was quite uncommon 15 years ago to speak with someone at the director level or the first-time VP inside of a biotech company, and they would ask really intelligent and educated questions about the cap structure of the company and have really strong opinions about equity. But now here in the US, that's really been quite common for more than a decade. Everyone is educated on the value of equity. So what you're going to see is a shift in Europe to a better appreciation of that. That's where you come in, and that's where you play a really important role, because the biggest challenge is dealing with someone who heard from their friend or heard this past weekend playing golf or heard at a dinner on Friday night that XYZ got so-and-so in the way of equity and compensation. Well, they're going based on third or fourth hand information that has absolutely no basis or no foundation.
Or they're using public company data, which is crap because it doesn't account for the equity, which in a private company is not the same as public company stock. It is, and it's also the wealth creation and the trajectory for a lot of these scientists and people coming out of academics and having opportunity to really change the world and be so innovative and be very focused on research and development and devices and tech and science that wouldn't exist otherwise. But if they don't have the equity component and they're not smart about it, and they have an exit or a liquidity and they don't have any wealth creation, then obviously they'll never let it happen again. But the better thing to do is to try and preempt that.
Right.
No, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, if I'm not incorrect, but you can tell me, I've often said that working with public company compensation information is a little bit like looking in the rearview mirror when you're going at 90 miles an hour down the road, but you're consistently updating your data, right? You're not relying
every day
on
real
public
time
information.
Yeah,
and that's something that that's something you can't do with the public companies. So that's where I think the private company data is really powerful. But I do think it's going to be really important for the European market and international markets for them to actually have real data to work with, rather than just going based on a rumor or simply poor advice.
Right. Well, just to put our own plug in, that's really where it's probably outside of your searches, because we don't do individual consults unless it's a CEO consult and it came on through a board. But on the staff level side or below the director level, we have a resource called CapLander, and that's really for individuals who are looking to evaluate a job offer or their first job offer ever, or look at their current compensation for how it compares to market. And it's only for privately held companies and investment firms. So that's a whole separate resource that's been developed.
I know last time with the CapLander we were talking. So did your daughter come and work for you?
She is actually in the process of onboarding in the next couple of weeks. So maybe we'll see a third generation.
Yeah, she has any questions on compensation before she comes on board, tell her to call Morgan and me, and we can help her out in negotiating.
After head's going to be spinning already, but perhaps meeting you all at one of these future JPMs.
All right. Well, I have my last real thing, because I think you've mentioned this before and it always has stuck with me, is that how you said that passion is really what you think or has one of the many keys to success. And kind of as your last part of this, or what you would say to somebody going forward, is what advice would you give, or what is one of your biggest lessons or takeaways from your 40 plus years of experience?
I think I shared with you that I wish I could take credit for it. I was on a flight from San Francisco to LA, sitting next to a young MBA grad, and he asked me. He said, "What is the most important characteristic in the executives you look for?" And I'd never really thought about that, because we look at so many different things, right? Especially in the field of biotech, which is you're looking for people who understand modalities and specific indications and therapeutic diseases and have dealt at different stages of companies. So you're digging into so much, but you never really think quite as much about that one question. But as I thought about it, unfortunately, we had a few minutes on the flight, I had to come up with passion, because, I can't remember who gets credit for this quote, but maybe it was Mark Twain, that, if you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I actually love what I do. I've often been asked what happens if you win the lottery tomorrow. And I would simply invest in about 7 or 8 different funds so that they would give me more work, because I love doing search work, right? I wouldn't stop working. I would continue to do this. And it's because I love what I do. So I think that, I think it's got to be really, really difficult, if not impossible, to truly be exceptional at what you do if you don't love it. And so I would say it's find something that you're passionate about and commit your life to it and commit your profession to it, and you'll be rewarded. You don't have to worry about the money, because the money will come. If you do a good job, you don't have to worry about doing a good job, because you don't have to worry about not wanting to get up in the morning and do what you do, because you look forward to it.
I always say this to you, Morgan, that there's no question we'll always be in business, because we love what we do and we're really passionate about it, and we get to work with great people like you. And I think that's right. My dad always said the same thing, that it was never a job for him being a pharmacist and doing what he did as an entrepreneur and working and helping people, that it was always just a passion. And I couldn't agree with you more. Before we wind up, I know that Christos, you and I are also passionate about champagne. I sent you a couple of bottles to congratulate you for being on the board. So have you been able to indulge in anything we sent?
I have not. They are in the refrigerator. Full disclosure, I've escaped for a couple of days and a long weekend here, but no, they are chilling in the freezer and in the refrigerator, excuse me, not in the freezer. And looking forward, but you definitely hit it directly on the nail with the makes of the champagne.
Yeah, I
especially the rosé champagne. So I'm super excited, and thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to enjoying champagne at JP Morgan again this coming year.
Great. Well, cheers to that, and thank you for joining us. And Morgan, wonderful, and we're going to sign off.
Thank you. Take care.